Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, I thought it would be a nice idea if you can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. We rented the cabin because it was cheap and quiet. It was about 2.5 hours from where we lived, tucked way out near a lake, with no other cabins or houses in sight. I remember we passed maybe 3 gas stations on the drive, and after a certain point, no cell service at all. Which we expected, honestly. That was kind of the appeal. A weekend without emails or texts. Just me and Danny, a stocked fridge, some books, and a fire pit. That was the plan. It wasn't a sketchy place or anything. The pictures online looked nice, rustic but not run down. There was a little kitchen, a small living room with big windows looking out at the trees, a bedroom in the back. No TV. Just one of those battery-powered radios, the kind you'd use during a storm. It was late October, so everything outside was dead and brown, but still kind of beautiful. Cold but not freezing yet. We got there around 4 in the afternoon. There was a lockbox on the porch with the key. No one met us in person. The cabin was clean enough, and someone had clearly been there recently. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt out front and a couple logs stacked by the fireplace that looked newly chopped. We made dinner, drank some wine, played cards. Around 10, we locked up, door bolted, windows shut, even pulled the curtains in the bedroom and went to bed. That first night, I woke up at some point to use the bathroom. I didn't check the time. The cabin was pitch black and totally silent. The kind of silence you don't really notice until you're used to noise. I couldn't hear anything, no cars, no wind, not even trees creaking. I remember thinking it was weird how still everything was. But I went back to bed and forgot about it. The next morning, we were eating breakfast in the little kitchen nook when Danny noticed a handprint. It was on the big window behind the couch. At first she thought it was on the outside, just kind of smudged against the glass, but when we got closer, we saw it was on the inside. It wasn't like a clean handprint either. It looked greasy. Like someone with dirty hands had pressed their palm and fingers flat against the glass and dragged them slightly to the left. You could see streaks in the oil. We just stood there staring at it for a second. We hadn't been in the living room that morning. We barely used that window at all the night before. And we definitely didn't touch it. I even checked, held up my hand to compare. It didn't match either of us. We both laughed it off at first. I said maybe we missed it last night, though I didn't really believe that. Danny thought maybe it was from the cleaners, whoever prepped the cabin before us. But it was so clear, fresh, not dusty or faded at all. That's when I started thinking about how quiet it had been the night before. No bugs, no wind, nothing. I tried to brush it off again, but I started feeling this weird, crawling pressure in the back of my neck. Like something about the situation didn't fit. We decided to go for a walk down by the lake to shake it off. There was a trail behind the cabin that led down the hill. Still no cell service, of course. We didn't see anyone else, not on the road, not on the trail. But we did hear this crack about 15 minutes into the walk. Like a big branch snapping. Danny jumped. I turned around and looked behind us, but there was nothing. No movement. Could have been an animal, sure. But everything went quiet right after that. No birds. Not even wind in the trees. We walked faster on the way back. That night, we double-checked every window and door. We even stacked a couple chairs in front of the back door, not because we thought it would stop anyone, but more like a signal. Something we'd notice if it got moved. I made a joke about it, trying to make Danny feel better. She didn't laugh. We left one of the lamps on in the living room when we went to bed, just in case. I woke up again in the middle of the night. But this time, it wasn't because I had to pee. There was a sound. It was faint, soft enough that I couldn't tell if I'd imagined it at first. Kind of a dry, clicking sound. Not steady, but spaced out, like someone gently tapping on something. Not with a knuckle. More like a nail. Click, click, click. I held my breath and listened. It was coming from the living room. I sat up, but I didn't get out of bed. Danny was still asleep beside me. I kept listening. The sound stopped. I waited, barely breathing, straining to hear anything. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe the heater. But the heater wasn't on. It was one of those old wall units, and when it kicked in, it was loud. This wasn't that. This was quiet. Intentional. I stayed there in bed for a long time before I got up. I didn't turn on any lights. I just crept out into the hallway and peeked around the corner. The lamp in the living room was off. I know we left it on. I was sure of it. I stood there, frozen, staring into the dark. I didn't hear anything now. No clicking. No creaking. Just silence. I backed up and went to the kitchen. Opened the drawer and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. Not because I thought I'd need it, I don't know what I was thinking. I went back to bed and kept the knife next to me. Danny never woke up. The next morning, the chairs we'd stacked in front of the back door were still there. Nothing was out of place. Except the lamp. When we got up, it was on again. Same as we'd left it the night before. I asked Danny if she turned it off and back on at any point. She said no. I didn't tell her about the clicking, or the fact that I thought someone had turned it off while we were asleep. We agreed to leave that day, even though we had one more night booked. There wasn't any dramatic reason, we just told ourselves we weren't really enjoying it. It was too quiet. We packed up and cleaned the place, like we were supposed to. I loaded the car while Danny wiped down the counters. I went back in for the last bag, and that's when I saw it. Another handprint. Not on the living room window this time. This one was on the bedroom window. The one right by the bed. Inside again. Same shape, same greasy look. Just slightly higher, like whoever left it was standing and leaning forward. We hadn't touched that window. I was sure. And it wasn't there that morning. I didn't call for Danny. I didn't want her to see it. I walked out, locked the cabin, dropped the key back in the lockbox. We got in the car and drove. We didn't say much for the first half hour. Just kept looking out the windows like we were expecting someone to follow us. We hit a patch of surface after about 40 minutes. I pulled over and called the rental company. I didn't say anything about the handprints or the noises. I just said we left early and the cabin should be all locked up. The guy on the phone said something that stuck with me. He said, "You're the first renters we've had since spring. Place has been empty all summer." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the dashboard. My hands felt cold, like I'd just come inside from the snow. Danny asked if everything was okay. I told her yeah. We kept driving. We never went back. It was supposed to be a 2-day hike. Just me, some lightweight gear, and a stretch of forest I hadn't tried before. Nothing too rugged, some hills, a stream or two, a lot of trees. I'd been solo hiking for years, Not off-grid survival stuff, just long walks with a pack. This trail looped around and spit you back out near where you parked. I figured I'd camp one night and be home by dinner the next day. The forecast said there'd be light rain, maybe some wind. Nothing bad. It started coming down heavier around 4 p.m. I'd been walking most of the day, stopped once for lunch, hadn't seen another person since I left the trailhead that morning. The path was marked, but in some spots it got real thin, overgrown in places. A few times I had to slow down to make sure I was still on it. I wasn't planning to stop yet, but when the rain picked up and the wind started snapping branches above me, I figured I'd start looking for a spot to hunker down early. I wasn't going to set up my tarp and all that. I kept walking, hoping for a patch of level ground, maybe some natural cover. That's when I saw it through a break in the trees, just a little up the slope to my left. A cabin. Old looking, kind of tilted to one side. Not a log cabin, more like planks and tar paper. One little chimney sticking out. No lights, no smoke. I figured maybe it was some old hunting shelter, not on any map. Looked abandoned. I stood there for a bit, debating whether to check it out. I don't usually like messing with stuff like that, just out of respect. But the rain was turning sideways, and I didn't feel like spending the night soaked through. The door was cracked open a little. Not broken, just not latched all the way. I knocked out of habit. No answer. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was small. One room. A busted table, a chair, a wood stove that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Smelled like damp wood and old ash. There was a cot along the far wall with a couple of moth-eaten blankets on it. No power, obviously. Just the wind whistling through a few cracks in the walls. I checked the place out real quick. No animals, no trash, no signs of anyone living there. The dust on the floor was undisturbed, except where water was dripping in from a hole near the back. Didn't look like anyone had been there in a long time. I figured I'd stay the night, dry off, and get moving early the next morning. I unrolled my sleeping pad on the cot, changed into dry socks, made some instant noodles with my camp stove. I left the door cracked for ventilation since there wasn't a real window, just a couple slits covered with plastic nailed over the frames. I sat on the floor and ate while listening to the wind. It got dark fast. It was sometime after 9 when I noticed something strange. I was lying on the cot reading with my headlamp, and I kept thinking I was hearing sounds that weren't the wind. Not loud, just small thumps. Like something brushing up against the outside of the cabin. Maybe a raccoon, but it didn't circle or move. Just a thump every couple minutes. I turned off the headlamp and sat still, listening. My ears rang from the sudden quiet. A few more minutes went by. Then I heard it again. Thump. Closer to the wall where my pack was hanging. I got up and checked the wall. Nothing there. I opened the door and shone my light around outside. The rain had stopped, but the trees were still dripping. I didn't see any movement. No animals, no tracks. Nothing. I went back inside and pushed the door shut all the way this time. Jammed a stick into the latch to hold it closed. Not locked, but enough to give me a warning if it opened again. I lay back down but left the light on. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember is waking up cold. The door was open again. Not all the way, just barely, maybe 2 or 3 inches. Just enough to let a sliver of air through. The stick I'd wedged in the latch was lying on the floor. I sat up fast and grabbed my headlamp. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was in my throat. I scanned the room. Nothing moved. I called out just a quiet hello. Not even sure why. No response. I stepped to the door, leaned out, light sweeping across the trees. Nothing. No footsteps in the mud, no noise. Just the wet woods and a breeze. I shut the door again. This time I moved the old chair in front of it. It was heavy and made a horrible scraping sound on the floor. But I didn't care. I wasn't going back to sleep anyway. I sat up the rest of the night, back to the wall, knife in my hand, light on. No more noises. No more movement. Just after dawn, I figured I'd pack up and get out before anything else weird happened. I started folding up my pad, and that's when I noticed a little drawer under the table. It had no handle, just a notch. I pulled it open. It stuck at first, then gave with a creak. Inside were some papers. Old yellow ones. A couple torn pieces of mail, a folded map, and 3 photographs. They were printed on regular paper, black and white, kind of grainy. The first one showed the outside of the cabin, taken from the trees. The second one was a shot through the plastic-covered window. The third one was me. Asleep on the cot. Taken through the window, at night. My body was turned slightly, one arm out of the blanket. You could see the beam from my headlamp glowing faintly against the wall. I dropped the photo. Just dropped it on the floor like it burned me. I looked at the window. Then the door. Then back at the photo. It wasn't just creepy. It was last night. I hadn't been here before. No one else had been with me. Whoever took that photo had been outside that window while I was asleep, sometime between when I dozed off and when I woke up to find the door open. I didn't think. I didn't wait. I shoved everything into my pack, left the rest of the food, didn't even tie my boots right. I just got out. I didn't take the trail back. I cut down the hill, followed the slope until I hit a creek, and walked through the water for as long as I could. Every time I stopped to breathe, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Not close. Not loud. But paced with mine. Stopping when I stopped. I made it back to the trailhead around noon, soaked and filthy and bleeding from where I'd scraped my hand on a rock. There was one other car there, some old guy getting his gear out of the trunk. I didn't say anything to him. I just got in my car and drove. I don't know who took that photo. I don't know how long they were watching me or how far they followed. I haven't gone hiking alone since. There were 5 of us, me, Chris, Mariah, Nate, and Cassie. We rented a cabin for the weekend to celebrate Nate's birthday. He turned 28, I think. It was one of those last-minute finds on an app, not a fancy Airbnb, just a simple A-frame cabin near a lake about 2 hours from the city. Cheap because it was off-season and way out of the way. It had 2 bedrooms, a loft, a fire pit out back, and no Wi-Fi or service. That was the draw. We figured we'd drink, play cards, maybe go hiking. Just unplug for a couple days. We got there late Friday afternoon in 2 cars, me and Chris in his Subaru, the others in Mariah's Jeep. The sun was already dipping behind the trees when we pulled in. The place looked fine. Kind of plain. A bit run down if I'm honest. Not in a horror movie way, just neglected. There was moss on the roof and a few boards on the porch felt soft when you stepped on them. Inside, it smelled like old wood and stale air, but it wasn't gross or anything. No red flags. We settled in, claimed spots, unpacked. The last bit of light disappeared by the time we got a fire going outside. The first night was normal. We drank, made hot dogs, passed around a Bluetooth speaker until the battery died. When it got too cold, we went inside and played some card game Mariah brought. We all turned in around one. No drama, no weird vibes. Everyone was in a good mood. I remember waking up once during the night because I had to pee. The bathroom was off the kitchen, and the cabin made a lot of weird creaking noises. I chalked it up to the cold air or the old floorboards. I noticed the light over the sink was on. I didn't remember anyone leaving it on, but I didn't really think twice about it. The next morning, things were off. Chris was already up, sitting on the front steps with a mug of coffee. I walked out and sat next to him. He didn't say anything for a second, then he just goes, "Look at the cars." All 4 tires on both vehicles were slashed. Not popped or flat, slashed. Clean slices, like from a knife. I just stared at them, thinking it had to be a prank or some stupid accident. But Chris shook his head and said he checked. 8 tires. All wrecked. Mariah and Nate came out a minute later, still in pajamas, and we told them. Cassie didn't come out. At first, we figured she was still asleep. She had the upstairs loft to herself. Nate went up to check and came back down saying she wasn't there. Her bag was still up there, her boots by the door, but no sign of her. We searched the cabin. Nothing. Then we checked the trail behind it that led toward the lake. Still nothing. No note, no text. Of course, we had no signal. Everyone tried their phones anyway, even though we knew it was pointless. Her phone was gone, though. That was the one thing missing. That's when things started feeling real. Not horror movie panic, just confusion. That weird, quiet kind that makes you feel like you're not really awake. Cassie wasn't the type to go off on her own without saying anything, especially not without shoes or a jacket. The air was cold enough to see her breath. We thought maybe she was trying to get signal, maybe she hiked up the road. So me and Chris started walking that way. We passed trees, empty ditches, no houses or cars for miles. The road twisted uphill, and we followed it for maybe 20 minutes, calling her name now and then. No answer. No footprints on the dirt shoulder except ours. We came back. Still no Cassie. Mariah was pacing by the fire pit. Nate was inside, flipping through drawers, I guess looking for anything helpful. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "What if someone came through in the night? What if they messed with the cars?" I remember saying something like, "We would have heard it," but even as I said it, I wasn't sure. I hadn't heard anything. Just creaks. Just the light being on. That's when I remembered the light. I told them about it, and for a few seconds everyone went quiet. No one admitted to turning it on. It was just on. We tried to stay calm. No one said the word kidnapped. But that was where all our minds went. We took turns walking loops around the property, calling her name, checking near the edge of the woods. I even knocked on the crawlspace door under the cabin like an idiot, as if she'd be stuck down there. By late afternoon, we knew we had to get help, but we were stranded. No service, no tires. Nate wanted to walk out and find a ranger station or a house, but we weren't even sure which direction would be fastest. And it was already getting dark. Chris said we should wait till morning, all stay together, and leave at first light. No one argued. We were all scared. We locked the doors, blocked the back one with a chair. No one had much of an appetite, so we just sat around the table in silence. Mariah kept checking the window. I kept checking the time. It got dark fast again, and the quiet outside started to feel wrong. At one point, Chris asked if we should sleep in shifts, just in case. Nate said yeah, but then no one made a plan, so we just kind of sat there too scared to suggest going to bed. Around midnight, I went to the kitchen to get some water. That's when I saw the muddy footprints. They were on the floor by the back door. Just two of them. Bare feet. Small, like Cassie's size. But not leading in or out, just there. In the middle of the floor, like someone stepped in, stood still, then vanished. No other prints. The door was still locked, chair still braced against it. I called the others over. None of us could explain it. Chris tested the floor with his shoe mud stock. There was no way someone walked through without leaving more than two prints. We didn't sleep. We sat in the living room with the lights on till morning. No one talked much after that. I kept hearing things, faint taps on the glass, little clicks in the walls. Probably animals. I told myself it was animals. As soon as it got light, we packed everything and left a note in case Cassie came back. Then we started walking. It took us almost 3 hours before we reached a gas station with signal. The guy working there looked at us like we were nuts, but he let us use the phone. The cops showed up maybe 30 minutes later. They searched the cabin and the area. Never found Cassie. A week later, her phone was found in a drainage ditch 6 miles from the cabin. The screen was cracked, no fingerprints but hers. Battery dead. No texts sent. No calls made. We gave our statements, did the interviews. It made the local news for a couple days. They searched the woods for weeks. Nothing. They called it a disappearance. That's what it says in the reports. But we know someone was there that night. Someone who slashed the tires. Someone who walked barefoot through the kitchen. Someone who turned on the light over the sink. And we never saw them. My sister Becca and I inherited the cabin from our uncle when he passed. We weren't close with him, Dad's older brother, kind of a loner. He didn't come around much. The place had been in the family for decades, way up north in the woods near the Canadian border. Remote, no neighbors, no internet. Just a cabin and a dirt road off the highway you could miss if you blinked. We only went up because it felt wrong to just sell it without at least seeing what was there. Becca's idea, not mine. I didn't want to drive 6 hours into the woods for some moldy shack, but I owed her. She handled all the estate stuff after Dad died. She said we could make a weekend out of it. We got there on a Friday around 4. The road turned to gravel about 30 minutes before we arrived, and after that it was just trees and silence. The cabin looked better than I expected. Small, just one floor and a steep roof, but the wood was in good shape. Paint was peeling, yeah, and the porch steps creaked, but nothing felt dangerous or about to collapse. You could tell someone lived there a long time. We unlocked it with the key from the lawyer. It smelled like dust and wood and a little like old coffee. Inside was tidy. No electricity, but there was a gas stove, an old fridge, not working, a couple of lamps. We lit some candles. Becca found a box of matches in a drawer like it had been waiting for us. We made a quick dinner from canned chili and bread. Talked about stupid stuff. The weather. Her job. We laughed about the creepy wallpaper in the bedroom, little faded birds flying in a circle. That night we set up sleeping bags on the floor in the living room. The mattress in the bedroom was so old it crunched when you pressed it. The floor was better. It was around 10 when we noticed the door in the kitchen. It was low, barely came up to my chest. It blended into the paneling. No knob, just a metal latch and a keyhole. I'd walked past it twice without seeing it. Becca noticed it. "Where's that go?" she asked. I tugged the latch, but it didn't budge. Locked. I tapped on it and it sounded hollow on the other side, like a stairwell maybe. "No key?" she asked. We looked. Checked drawers, boxes, even the weird little compartment above the stove. Nothing. So we left it. It wasn't like we were going to tear it open with a crowbar. We joked that maybe it was full of cold or moonshine. Honestly, it barely stuck in my head after that. I slept okay until sometime after midnight. I woke up because of a sound. It was really soft, just a tick-tick-tick, like something tapping on wood. Not constant, 3 taps, then silence. Then another 3. I thought maybe it was an animal under the porch. I stayed still for a few minutes listening, but it stopped. Next morning, I asked Becca if she heard it. She said she thought it was me. We spent most of Saturday clearing out some junk, just seeing what was in the place. There were a bunch of old tools in the shed out back, a stack of yellowed newspapers from the 80s, a filing cabinet full of receipts and letters. The last one was dated 2004. That was the year our uncle had some health thing, a stroke or a heart thing, I can't remember exactly. After that, he never left the property. According to Dad, he stopped answering calls. We didn't talk about the basement door much. Becca mentioned it once in passing, said something like still no key, and I shrugged. It felt like background noise. That night, after we blew up the candles and lay down to sleep, I heard it again. 3 taps. Then nothing. Then again. 3 slow taps, like someone knocking politely. Coming from the kitchen. I sat up. So did Becca. We looked at each other. "That's not an animal," she said. We got up, grabbed the flashlight, and walked to the kitchen. The door was still shut. Locked. We stood there listening. Nothing. She knocked once on the door. Just a single knock. Silence. We waited maybe a full minute. I started to turn away. Then tap, tap, tap. From the other side. I don't remember what we said. I think Becca whispered "holy shit" and backed up. I just stood there. My heart was hammering, but I couldn't move. Then it stopped. We left the flashlight on and went back to the living room. We didn't sleep much. The tapping didn't come back. Next morning, Becca wanted to leave. I didn't argue. I think we were both just done. We packed up quick, didn't eat, didn't clean. We were halfway to the car when she stopped and said, "Wait." She ran back inside and came out a minute later holding a small metal box. She found it behind the woodpile inside, tucked into a hollow spot in the wall. It was wrapped in a dish towel and wedged deep. There was a key inside. It matched the one on the basement door. I told her no. Flat out. "Let's just go." But she was already walking back toward the cabin. I followed because I couldn't let her go down there alone. We unlocked the door. It creaked like a horror movie. The stairs were narrow and steep, with planks without a railing. Smelled like dirt and rust. We went down slow. The flashlight flickered once but held. The basement was just one room. Low ceiling. Concrete floor. A workbench in the back with some tools, a broken chair, and an old mattress propped against the wall. No people. No animals. Nothing. Except, on the wall opposite the stairs, there were long scratches in the wood paneling. For lines, uneven, like from fingernails or maybe a tool. Underneath them, written in pencil, were the words, Don't open it again. Becca took a picture with her phone. We stood there maybe 5 minutes, waiting for anything to happen. Nothing did. We left. Drove home without talking much. I think she was trying to make sense of it. I wasn't. I just wanted to be done. We didn't tell anyone for a while. It felt dumb trying to explain it. The door, the knocks, the writing. What could you say? Becca went back one more time a few months later on her own. Said she wanted to document everything. I didn't go. She texted me that day when she got there. Said the door was shut again, locked. No sign of anyone breaking in. But when she opened it with the key, the words on the wall were gone. Like they'd been wiped clean. No scratches either. She left that day and never went back. We still own the cabin. Can't bring ourselves to sell it. But we don't talk about it anymore. I got to the cabin a little later than I planned. It was this place up in the Adirondacks, middle of nowhere, thick woods on all sides. I'd booked it for a long weekend, just to get out of the city and unplug. No service, no Wi-Fi, which was kind of the point. I wanted quiet. I'd been dealing with work crap for months and just needed to be somewhere no one could find me. The cabin was basic, wood paneling, little front porch, 1 bedroom, kitchenette, tiny bathroom. It was listed on one of those smaller rental sites, not Airbnb or anything, but it had good reviews. The owner had sent me the code for the lockbox earlier in the week. Check-in was supposed to be after 3. I pulled in around 4:30. There was a car in the driveway already. Silver Honda Civic, older model. I figured maybe the cleaner hadn't left yet or something. I parked next to it and got out. The place looked quiet, windows dark, nothing obviously off. I grabbed my backpack and walked up to the porch. I opened the lockbox, punched in the code. The key wasn't there. That gave me pause. I stood there for a second with the box open in my hand, just kind of confused. I double-checked the code, then tried the door. It was unlocked. That was weird too. I didn't go in right away. I just stood there, listening. Then the door opened, and a guy stepped out. He looked to be around my age, mid-30s, maybe a little younger. Messy dark hair, scruffy beard. He was wearing a hoodie and sweatpants, looked like he'd just woken up from a nap. We both kind of froze. He said, "Oh, hey. Can I help you?" I told him I'd rented the cabin. He blinked, looked confused, then said, "Me too." We went back and forth for a minute. I told him my name, showed him the confirmation email. He said he'd gotten his through a different site. He didn't have service, so he couldn't pull up his receipt, but he said his name was Brian, and that he'd driven up from Scroon Lake earlier that morning. I didn't recognize the site. He said he'd used something like Woodsy Stay or Forest Break. One of those off-brand booking sites. It was awkward. He seemed normal, if a little off. Like something was bothering him, but he didn't say what. I asked him if maybe he'd rented the place for different dates or the wrong weekend, and he just sort of shrugged and said, maybe. We ended up agreeing I'd call the owner when I got service again, and that I could stay the night if I took the couch. I didn't love the idea, but it was getting late, and I didn't want to start driving around trying to find a hotel with no signal. The place was clean, but there wasn't much to it. 1 bedroom with a queen bed, a little living room with a couch and a wood stove, and a kitchenette. I put my stuff down near the door and tried not to feel weird about it. Brian made us tea. He didn't talk much. He sat on the armchair with a book, something old and thick with no cover. I tried to make a little small talk, where he was from, what he did, but his answers were short. He said he worked from home, but didn't say what he did. Said he liked hiking. That was about it. At some point, I asked if he'd mind me putting on some music. He just said, "Actually, could we keep it quiet tonight?" Then he smiled, kind of forced, and said, "I've had a headache all day." I didn't press. I just said sure. Around 10, I told him I was gonna crash. The couch was short, but I made it work. I used a hoodie as a pillow. Brian said goodnight and went into the bedroom, closed the door behind him. I lay there for a while listening to the owls creak. No traffic, no wind, just the old wood making little settling noises. At some point I dozed off. I woke up a few hours later. It was pitch black. The kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face. I thought I heard something. At first, I figured it was Brian getting up to use the bathroom or something. But the sound wasn't footsteps. It was more like a soft rummaging. Like someone going through a bag. I sat up a little and reached for my phone to check the time. It wasn't on the charger. I checked the floor. Then the side table. Then my jacket pocket. Nothing. I turned on the flashlight app on my backup phone, the one I keep for emergencies, and started quietly looking around. My backpack was next to the front door where I left it, but the zipper was open. It had definitely been closed before I went to sleep. My wallet wasn't in the front pocket anymore. Neither were my keys. I felt sick. I stood there, barefoot, holding the flashlight and listening. The door to the bedroom was shut. No sound coming from inside. I walked over and knocked, soft at first. Then louder. No answer. I knocked again, called his name. Nothing. I tried the handle. It was locked. There wasn't a lock on the inside of that door when I checked earlier. It was just an old wooden knob with no button or latch. But now it wouldn't turn. I felt this weird wave of panic, not full-blown terror, just that sick rush where your chest tightens and your skin goes cold. I walked back to the living room, checking every drawer and shelf for the cabin key. Gone. I opened the front door. It wasn't locked, so I stepped out onto the porch. His car was still there. Mine wasn't. At first, I thought maybe I was losing it. I walked down the steps barefoot, flashlight shaking a little in my hand, and looked around like maybe I'd parked it further down the drive or something. But it was gone. Just the Civic, parked a little crooked, front wheels turned like it had been pulled in fast. I went back inside. The bedroom door was still shut. I banged on it hard this time. "Brian," I said, "where the hell are my keys?" No answer. I said, louder, "Did you move my stuff?" Nothing. I didn't know what to do. There was no signal, no landline, no neighbors. I opened the kitchen drawer and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, this old serrated bread knife with a chipped handle. I sat on the couch with it and stared at the bedroom door until the sky started to get light outside. He never came out. Around 6, I stepped outside again. The Civic was gone. I didn't hear it start, and I'd been awake the whole time. I searched the house again. The bedroom was still locked. I ended up kicking the door in. It splintered near the latch. I braced myself for, I don't know what, but it was empty. The bed hadn't been slept in. No bags, no shoes, no toothbrush in the bathroom. The window was open a few inches. My wallet was under the bed. No cash, but my cards were still there. My keys were in the wood stove. Not burned, just sitting there on the ash grate, like they'd been placed carefully inside. I left that morning. Walked 5 miles until I found a ranger station off the highway. When I got home, I emailed the rental site. They said the cabin had been pulled from their listings over a year ago, and that they had no record of my booking. The site I used was gone too, just led to an error page. I still don't know who the guy was. He never raised his voice. Never threatened me. Never touched me. But I've never been more afraid of another person in my life. I pulled into the driveway just before sunset. Me, my wife Tara, and our 6-year-old, Lily, wanted a few days away from everything. The cabin sat on a ridge, trees crowding around it, no power lines or cell service. It was exactly the kind of place we've been avoiding since the pandemic. But it looked peaceful in the pictures. Quiet. When we got inside, smelled like pine and damp wood. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a wood stove. Tara flipped a switch by the front door. Nothing. They warned us in the email it was solar powered and the batteries might be low. We used lanterns. I went straight outside to stack firewood while Tara unpacked and Lily chased a robin around the porch. The air was clean, birds chirped. I noticed movement just beyond the trees, a guy standing still. Maybe 50 yards. I thought it was a deer, but he didn't move. Just watched. I wandered to the edge of the clearing. The light dimmed. I waved. The guy turned and melted back into the brush. I thought, weird neighbor. I didn't say anything until dinner. We ate soup and bread, all of us a little tense from the drive. Tara asked if we'd see anyone else. I said probably not. I didn't tell her about the guy. Didn't want to alarm her. That night I slept badly. At dusk I heard something brushing against the window of one branch. I jolted awake, but it stopped. Afternoon curled into evening, and I swore I caught his silhouette again by the birch line when I took Lily out to go potty. She didn't see him. I didn't tell her I saw someone else. I couldn't explain it. Next day, I tried not to worry. I brought in water from the creek and set up camp chairs by the fire pit. I left my jacket on the back of one chair and walked inside to put Lily to bed. When I came back, the jacket was gone. I looked everywhere. Didn't find it. My heart jumped. Tara said maybe I forgot it in the car. Maybe someone took it. But no locks. We were that isolated. Someone watching us felt more likely now. I found the jacket later, draped on the woodpile. The sleeves muddy, like someone just slipped it and then tossed it back. That night, before sleep, we turned off the lamp in the living room. Our windows faced the trees. I caught a glimpse of him again. Same posture, same spot, just standing. We froze. He didn't wave, shrink or run. Just looked. I swore, but Tara said nothing. I didn't talk about it later. Next morning, we woke to laughing. Not ours. Tara ran to the bedroom window and I followed. Nothing. No cars on the dirt road. No footprints or tire tracks. Nothing that suggested another person. Just a quiet place. Tara tried to convince herself it was squirrels with bones or something, not a person. I tested the solar setup. Lights flickered but stayed. Maybe weak batteries. I went to town that day. I needed signal. About 20 miles away I found a convenience store and got a coffee. I called work, told them I'd be out of range for a few days. I texted my friend Jeff asking him to check messages if I dropped off grid. He wrote back right away asking if I was okay. I ignored him. By the time I hit no signal, I realized Kara would juggle both kit and no power. That grotty feeling in my gut grew. I drove back. When I pulled up, dusk was falling. Lights inside dimmed. I flicked them on just as the power failed, all of it. Solar died or clouds drifted. Kara had Lily in the living room, blankets wrapped. We heard someone walking softly across the clearing. Pine needles crushed a footstep. I flipped a lantern on and peered out. Nothing. Then Lily asked, "Daddy, was that a man outside?" Her voice cracked. We froze. I saw a too dark pants, hoodie, just beyond the trees. Too tall to be me. He stayed still, watching. I knelt down. "It's okay, baby," I said, but I felt hollow. That guy had shown up when lights died. He came close, I thought. We never saw his face. Kara and I looked at each other. I said, "We're leaving." She nodded. We packed with speed we didn't know we had. I grabbed flashlights, some food, the keys. Kara picked up Lily. Another footstep in the clearing, in the dirt near the porch. Crunch. She froze. I looked. The guy was gone. We piled into the car. I locked the doors. The heater roared because there was fuel in the tank. I drove off before a second thought. That night, in a motel room, we watched bad TV until early. Next morning, I drove back with a cop. He walked around the cabin. He found footprints, multiple sets leading toward the road and back. No prints inside the porch. No sign of entry through windows. He said I should check in with the rental company, maybe board up, call a ranger. I did. They said no one else was supposed to be there, and local rangers had been by before and found nothing odd. They apologized, offered future credit, but I'd already decided. We sold the rental rights. I paid to board up windows and door. Never went back. Every evening when the sun starts to set, I look toward the tree line. And sometimes I swear I see him standing just past the woods, staring. I don't say anything to Kara or Lily. I tell myself it's just a trick of the light. But I didn't meet him, not in person. But we did. I drove up the gravel road around lunchtime, me and my partner, Jen, renting this cabin near Alpine State Park for the weekend. We were excited to get away from the noise, cook over a wood stove, go hiking. No cell service past the ranger's gate, and that was fine. We both needed a break. We pulled into the small clearing by the cabin. It was quiet, just wind in the pines, no cars, no people. I flicked the engine off and we unloaded. Jen found a note tucked under the windshield, just said, "Safety check done. Enjoy your stay. P.S." No official header, no date. I pictured some park staff poking around. We went inside, poked around, started building a fire pit. The place was spotless, smelled like fresh paint and pine. I didn't think much of the note. It didn't worry me. Jen thought maybe they looked for fire hazards. It was fine. Later, around 3, we were fetching more wood when a woman showed up down the drive. Not walking, driving. White Dodge minivan, pulled up quietly, engine off. She waved, clipboard in hand. She looked official, khakis and polo with a small green patch on the sleeve, like a park badge. "Hi." I'm from Alpine State Park, she said. Doing safety checks today. Just checking alarms, exits, lockboxes. Name on reservation? I told her our names. She scribbled on the clipboard something illegible. I asked when she got in. She said she'd been at the ranger station since 9, then came out mid-morning, stopped at 2 cabins today. Ours was next. She asked smart questions when we'd arrive. How many people? She tested the smoke alarm, turned a couple of lights on, tested the door latch, jiggled the deadbolt. She was polite, stood to the side when Jen and I walked around. I asked about cell service. She said there was none past the main lot. Then she left, said have a good weekend, and tossed the clipboard in the passenger seat. Before leaving, she looked at us again and said, if anything comes up, call Park Dispatch. We have a ranger 24/7. Smiled and walked away. We waved and shut the door. I thought of that note and shrugged, probably the same person. We carried firewood inside, had coffee, and started our first dinner on the wood stove. That night we stayed up late, playing cards, drinking. Cabin creaked, wind rattled the windows. We shut everything, slid the little deadbolt at 11. I put my keys on the counter, Jen's purse under a chair. We slept fine. I think I woke up around midnight, heard something moving outside, but put it down to a deer or raccoon. Nothing obvious. Next morning I made eggs. The place felt the same, light streaming in, wind in the trees. But I felt twitchy, like when you leave the door unlocked. I mentioned the clipboard and clipboard woman to Jen, and she said it was fine, just routine. I trusted her. We packed for a hike up past the ridge. Cabin empty, lights off, door locked. Hiked hard all day, reached a lookout at 4. Beautiful views, sun still bright. Took pics, chatted, jerked trail mix out of my bag. On the way back I realized I left my keys. We descended fast. Got back to the cabin around 6. I fumbled pockets, no keys. I checked the table. Nada. Checked Jen's purse, there. She said she grabbed them last. I grabbed the spare from my backpack. Good. We got inside. The door was slightly ajar. Not unlocked exactly, but it looked like the deadbolt had been turned halfway. When we unlocked it, the latch clicked right through, like it wasn't catching. I froze. Jen said, "What the hell?" The cabin looked the same. Nothing knocked over, nothing missing. Smoke alarm still there. Lights off. Clipboard gone. No sign of anyone else. We searched pockets, backpacks. No spare key, I'd left it in the van. Now we couldn't relock properly. I tightened the deadbolt. Didn't feel right. I started pacing, looking out windows. Couldn't see anything. We left for dinner in the van, ate cheap burgers. Got back around 10, sky dark. Cabin seemed darker. I poured coffee, checked locks. All tight, but I felt claustrophobic. That night I slept in the bedroom, Jen on the living room couch. I heard a creak around 2. Not the windows, but the door. I didn't go check. Might have been wind or animal. I stayed under blankets. Morning, we heard wind outside and the branches brushing on the roof. I made breakfast. The place felt stale. I tried to shake it, but couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. We decided to leave that afternoon. Pack up, hit the road. When I pulled the van up, I went to lock the cabin. I tested the door latch. It still jiggled, showed it might have been forced at some point. I took pictures of the deadbolt, door frame, latch hardware. No obvious damage, but not tight. Then we stopped at ranger station at the park entrance. I asked about safety checks. The guy looked confused. "We don't do safety checks on cabins," he said. "Never did. Doesn't fall under park service." He typed our names. No record. He asked for the note I found. I clicked twice, showed him. He stared. "Never seen that," he said. "No one uses that stamp. And clipboard never saw that emblem." My guts sank. He offered to send a ranger to check cabin later. I nodded. We headed home, hearts heavy, phone signal coming back on. That night I closed doors tight. Couldn't sleep worth a damn. I got a text next day, ranger checked. No sign forced entry from outside. Door frame looks fine. Deadbolt not engaged. He said there was nothing else he could do, but if we saw the woman again, call 911. I still get chills thinking about it. That person had keys. They watched us, walked in, let us think it was safe. They made the lock look right. They knew about us in cabin use. They probably drove in and out in daylight. I don't rent cabins anymore without insisting on surveillance or lock change first. And I never ignore a weird note or a random clipboard woman claiming authority. I remember the morning we found the cabin like it was no big deal at first. Me and two friends, Jenna and Marcus, were hiking this ridge trail in the Cascades, aiming for a summit nobody talked about because it wasn't famous. We ran low on water by mid-afternoon, and our phones lost signal somewhere past the switchbacks. I thought we'd hit a boreal lake everyone raved about, but the trail just kept climbing. By the time the sun was low, we were stumbling through thick undergrowth, no cairns, no path. Then, through the trees, we saw it, a little A-frame cabin, leaned over like it might fall apart next storm. The porch looked half collapsed, boards sagging in. A tin chimney poked out the roof, and I could smell smoke, faint but real. Jenna and Marcus exchanged that look like, is it haunted? But we needed water more than we needed thrills. We stepped up and rapped on the door. No answer. Door was unlocked. I pushed it, and it creaked open. Inside was odd. A stone hearth had embers glowing red, not enough to feel heat, but enough to know someone had just been there. On the floor was a cast iron skillet half full of water, steam rising. The place was clean, no mouse droppings, no cobwebs, nothing but fresh footprints in the dirt floor. Against the far wall, a small bed, thin mattress, stained but neat, blanket folded at the foot. And pointing straight at it, on a little tripod, was a camera. One of those old DSLR bodies, lens aimed at where someone would sleep. I felt my throat go dry. We called out, "Hello?" But only our echoes answered. Jenna crept over to the hearth, poked at the coals with a stick. Smoke curled up. Marcus circled the bed, checked the camera, battery attached, lens cap off, SD card slot empty but not gaping, like someone had pulled it out in a hurry. "Weird," he said. "Why point a camera at the bed?" I shrugged and took off my pack, fishing out my water bladder. The hose line stopped. I shook it empty. Jenna had the same story. We were dry. I whispered, "Find water, then bail." But the log bench by the stove looked like it had been carved by hand, smooth, comfortable. I sank down, eyes flicking to the front window. The glass was dusty on one side, clean on the inside, and through it, I saw our tracks, fresh sole prints in the soft earth. Whoever built this cabin was paying attention. We spent 10 minutes shouting for whoever might be out there, but the woods were silent. No wind, no birds, nothing. Every time I stepped toward the door, I heard it tick beneath the floorboards, like wood settling, but too rhythmic. Tick, tick, tick. I couldn't tell if it was inside or out. Jenna found a well pump in the back corner, a hand pump sticking out of the floor. We pried it loose. Marcus pulled the handle. Russ squeaked, then nothing. He yanked harder. Water spurted, rusty. We splashed it into bottles, gulped it down. Felt like salvation. Then Jenna crouched by the hearth and sniffed. "Smells like burnt meat," she said. I tasted the air, smoky, metallic. Not just wood fire. I edged over, poked at the skillet. There was something congealed in the bottom, dark red, like dried blood. My stomach churned. I stood up so fast I hit my head on the low ceiling beam. "Let's go," I said, voice low. I grabbed my pack. Marcus dropped his half-full bottle and it shattered, glass tinkling. Jenna's eyes were wide. We filed for the door. That tick-tick sound got louder, echoing under the floor. As we turned the knob, I noticed the latch plate was twisted, like someone had pried it and then bent it back. The door felt loose in the frame. I yanked it open, and a snap of wind hit us. Outside was that same silent forest, but I felt watched. I heard a crack behind me, tiny, like a twig underfoot, but when I looked, nothing moved. We hiked out single file without talking. My heart pounded so loud I thought the woods would hear it. Every few steps, one of us would glance back, half expecting to see someone creeping along in the shadow. It got darker. We lost the ridge trail and ended up bushwhacking downhill, tearing sleeves on thorns, losing boots in mud. By the time we hit a fire road, the sun was gone. We stumbled toward where we thought the trailhead might be. Then we saw headlights, 2 cars parked at a gate, Ranger trucks. I waved my arms. They rolled down a window and yelled, "Lost." I told them about the cabin. They frowned. "Which cabin?" one ranger asked. I gave the coordinates from my GPS watch. He looked at his partner and said, "No structure here. Just a clearing that burned in 17. Nothing rebuilt." I showed him a picture on my phone, the A-frame roof, the chimney, the windows. He said, "That's private land." The other ranger chimed in, "You might have crossed a boundary." While collapse for a private owner is a trespass. "We'll drive you back officially." We rode out in the back of the truck, Jenna white as a sheet, Marcus quiet, me staring out at dark trees. When we reached the gate, he said, "Don't come back." Later, at the station, I downloaded the photos. The last one was of the bed, empty. I swiped back through, the camera on the tripod, the sticks of wood, the broken skillet. No sign of the tripod's owner. No prints near the camera. And on one photo, I froze. In the reflection of the window behind the bed, something moved, a flash of a boot stepping into frame at the edge. I zoomed in. You can see it clear, heavy tread, like work boots, coming in from the right. I didn't sleep well that night. Every crack of the heater, every creak in the walls sounded like the tick-tick under the cabin floor. I kept the photo on loop. The next morning, I called a friend with a 4x4 and went back to the forest edge, but the private property sign was gone. Just trees and broken ferns. No trace of any road leading in. I left the corner of my photo printed at the station in case someone else showed up missing. They never did. I moved on, but sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear what's settling under my own floorboards, tick, tick, tick. And I check the window's reflection, half expecting to see a tripod lens aimed right at me. I didn't plan on finding cameras. I wanted a weekend alone, no cell service, no noise, just me in the woods. The cabin was on a ridge in the national forest, dirt road 3 miles in. When I parked Friday afternoon, I noticed nothing out of place, a little A-frame, chipped paint, a few logs stacked by the porch. I locked my truck, grabbed my bag, and stepped up to the door. Inside smelled like old pine and damp blankets. No power, just a solar panel outside and a battery bank under the sink. I flipped on one of the battery-powered lanterns and started unpacking. The bed was made, blankets folded. I'd read online the owners sometimes left cameras to check for wildlife or trespassers, but I figured they hid them well. Then I walked to the living room window and froze. There was a camera, low on a tree trunk, pointing right at the porch. A cheap trail cam battery pack taped to the side, blinking red light every few seconds. My heart skipped. I stepped outside, sure it was old bird-watching gear, but across the clearing, another one glowed on the corner of the cabin, angled at the back steps. I counted 4 more around the perimeter, one by the woodpile, one near the water tank, one half-buried pointing at the door, and one taped high above the front window. I stood in the clearing, circling slowly, feeling exposed. The sun was slipping behind peaks. The woods were quiet, no birds, no wind. I knocked on the cabin walls, only my echo answered. I picked up the nearest cam and checked the date on its screen, last motion detected 10 minutes ago. There, in the log pile shadow, was me walking right toward it. I jammed it in my bag and went back inside, fumbling for my phone. No service, of course. In the kitchen drawer, I found a dusty landline handset and plugged it into the wall phone jack. The cord squeaked. I dialed 911. Nothing. I tried family. Nothing. Felt like being cut loose. That night I lit the stove, boiled water, ate cold beans from a can. Every few minutes, I heard a soft click outside, like a camera snapping. I sat at the table, staring at the door, waiting to catch movement. My lantern flickered. I checked the lock, bolt slid tight. Then it clicked. Somebody was following a routine, checking on those cams. I tried to imagine who, the owner? A neighbor? But why point them at the cabin? I lay down on the bed with the camera under my pillow. Sleep came in drips. I woke at 2 a.m. to the scrape of boots on the porch boards. I held my breath, heart thumping. Nothing else. The porch settled. I waited until dawn. Morning came gray and wet. I ate oatmeal and decided I'd hunt down every camera. I donned my pack, grabbed gloves, flashlight. The first was easy, taped on a low branch. The second was half hidden in ferns by the woodpile. I almost missed it. In each case, batteries still good, blinking light. I stuffed 5 more into my bag. Only one left up by the chimney, taped to a crook of the roof. I set down my bag, climbed the low stepladder left by the owners, reached up, and felt the cold plastic under moss. I yanked it off carefully, and the ladder slipped, metal screeching on the painted siding. My heart shot up. I froze. No rustle back in the trees, no footsteps. Just the remaining lamp in the window, faint glow. I climbed down, slammed the ladder away, and stumbled inside, shutting the door. I was halfway to dumping the last cam in the fire pit when the phone rang. Not a dial tone or buzzing, an actual ring. My breath caught. I stared at the handset, then lifted it. Put it back. No accent. Quiet. Calm. Closer, like the speaker leaned toward the mouthpiece. It wasn't pre-recorded. It was someone watching me hook by hook, camera by camera. Who is this? I said. Silence for 2 beats, then put it back. Click, the line went dead. I set the camera on the counter, hands shaking. All the batteries were still inside. Whoever called knew exactly what I'd done. I paced. Dusk would come again soon. I didn't want to be trapped in there. I grabbed the camera bag, stormed out, and started remounting them in reverse order. My hands moved fast, adrenaline making me clumsy. I stabbed the ground with a stake to hold one against a stump. I taped another to the side of the cabin just above eye level. I left the last one by the woodpile, just shy of its old spot, leaning it against the logs. By the time I finished, the sun was a red slash behind the peaks. I sprinted to the porch, grabbed my bag, and slammed the door, jamming a chair beneath the knob and sliding the deadbolt. I heard a snap outside, distant, like a branch breaking. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. I loaded my gear, tossed my bag in the truck, and checked my mirrors twice. The road below the driveway was twisted clay. No tire tracks but mine. I clicked the locks and drove off barefoot, headlights cutting through mist. My mind raced with everything I'd seen, the cameras, the call, the silent watcher. I didn't stop until I hit the ranger station 8 miles down. I told them what happened, cameras glued and taped, motion lights blinking, a phone call from the landline. They scribbled notes, then said, "Those cams aren't ours." I asked about local hunters or game surveys. He shook his head. No permissions issued. They had no record of any checks. He gave me a map to the nearest gas station with service. I checked my voicemail there for missed calls from my roommate, 2 from my dad. I called home, voice wobbly, told them I was fine, just freaked out. Dad asked if I wanted to come home now. I said yes. That evening I drove through fading light, thinking about the clip, put it back, and whoever stood just beyond the trees, watching. Back in town, I slept under a running ceiling fan, windows locked, phone within reach. I asked my roommate to meet me early next morning to swap out my truck and bring my boots, wet, caked in mud. Now, when I hear a camera shutter in a movie or see blinking lights on trail cams, I flinch. And sometimes at night, I dream I'm back at that cabin, tapping each camera into a tree and listening for that rasp of breath on the phone line, someone still waiting for me to finish the job. I hadn't planned to find a cabin. I was solo hiking a section of the Crestback Trail that wasn't in most guidebooks, just a faint footpath through old growth pines. My map ended in a blank white spot labeled wilderness. I thought I'd follow game trails, loop back at dusk. It was late July, sun still high when I left the trailhead at 9, and I figured I'd be back before dark. By midday the path had all but vanished. I bushwhacked under branches, trying to pick up a ridge that might lead me out. The forest was quiet, no birdsong, no wind, just the snap of my boots on needles. Every few minutes I'd pause, listen, and feel like something else was listening too. I told myself it was just being off my usual routes, but my stomach knotted each time I heard a twig crack 90 yards away. Around 2, I spotted something straight ahead through the trunks, a patch of sunlight on a metal roof. I froze, convinced it was a rock face or a flash of broken water, but as I crept closer, I saw a little cabin set into a slope. It had weathered planks and one small window, dark and empty. No smoke, no sign of a chimney, but the door was propped open. I stood 30 feet away, heart thumping, and called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded loud. It disappeared into the trees. I tried the door, it swung inward on old hinges. Inside, the air was musty, like wood leaves. A table sat in one corner with a chipped mug on it. On the far wall someone had stacked firewood, even though the stove looked untouched. A coil of rope hung on a nail by the window. Through a crack in the wall, I saw the forest outside. No trail lead to this spot. No tire ruts. It looked abandoned, but the mug had fresh tea stains. I ran my finger around the rim and saw a dry ring in the wood. Someone had been here recently. I stepped back and tried to make sense of it. I checked my watch, 2:15. I debated waiting, shouting again. Maybe someone was inside. I walked around to the window and peeked in. On the single bed in the corner, a blue blanket was rumpled, like someone had been sleeping there. On the floor by the bed, I spotted a pair of boots facing the door. One boot was tipped forward. I could have sworn I heard breathing, a soft exhale from the other side of the wall. My pulse went to my throat. I backed away, then stopped. Somewhere in the cabin's back I heard a floorboard creak. It was slow, deliberate, like someone shifting weight. I called out, louder this time, "Hey, I'm just passing through." No answer, but the cabin felt smaller. I imagined a shape behind the blankets, someone watching me through the darkness. I gripped my trekking pole and said, "I'm calling Rangers." I turned, sprinted back the way I came, adrenaline burning my lungs. I didn't look behind until I hit the old trail again. I heard nothing, no footsteps, no door slamming. Just the forest returning to its quiet. The ranger station was 10 miles down a gravel road I managed to flag a passing pickup to drive me to. They dusted off their Ford and followed me back the next morning with a GPS unit. Midday sun was high when we returned. The forest had that warm hush, small bugs buzzing around broken sticks. We pulled off the track where I remembered the cabin clearing. There was a shallow depression in the ground, nothing more than a hollow, maybe from an old root system. No foundation stones, no planks, no metal roof. Just leaf litter and ferns. I pointed to gray soil patches where I'd stomped in. The rangers waded through. They found no nails, no bottle caps, nothing that couldn't have been there before. I led them uphill, trying to find any stump that matched where the door had been. We circled, shining lights into hollows, checking every old root. Nothing looked disturbed. One ranger tapped his boot on the soil. "Maybe it collapsed," he said. But I walked the circumference of the clearing and saw no boards, no broken beams, just solid ground. I tried to explain about the mug, the boots, the stove. How the air had been stale inside. How the blanket by the window had a crease like someone leaned against it. How I heard breathing and footsteps. They nodded, polite, but silent. One ranger offered to hike me out to the main trail and promised to check back with aerial photos. I climbed into the truck and watched the dust settle behind us. I kept squinting at the ferns, expecting to see a board or a flash of metal. Back at my truck, I sat on the tailgate, rubbing my arms. My legs still trembled. My mind replayed the cabin, the way the door swung, the way the mug balanced on the table, the faint breath. I kicked the gravel, hardened like it never held a foundation. I called my sister on speakerphone as I drove toward the highway. She asked if I'd been safe. I said yeah, just tired. I didn't mention the cabin. I'd spent the rest of the day hiking new, clearly marked trails farther from that spot. Weeks later, I looked at my photos on the computer. There was one I took just before I ran, shot through the window frame into the gloom. In the far corner, I could make out something dark by the wall, like a shadow thicker than any tree silhouette, something crouched. I zoomed in. It wasn't a trick of light. It had edges, someone's arm, maybe, draped over the bedpost. I deleted the image. I've never gone back to that section of the forest. Every time I'm in the Cascades now, I stick to well-trodden paths, mile markers, signs. I don't talk about the cabin to friends. But sometimes I lie awake thinking about that hidden clearing, the taste of stale air, the weight of watching eyes. I wonder if someone built the cabin just for that purpose, to vanish inside and watch whoever stumbled in, and then tear it down before they noticed. I arrived at the cabin with Mark just as the light turned the weird yellow-orange you get in late October. It was our first trip together since my promotion at work, and I'd been looking forward to nothing but coffee on the porch and hiking all day. The listing said secluded, which I took as a feature, not a warning. The place looked exactly like the photos: dark wood, stone chimney, mossy roof. Inside it was small but clean. There was a stack of firewood by the stove, a well-worn couch, a tiny kitchen, and a bedroom with a dresser. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just one of those old rotary landlines in the corner. We unpacked, made chili, drank the last of our wine in mugs. At 9, we locked the door and went to bed. The walls were thin. I heard Mark breathe for hours. I woke once to the wind tapping branches outside the window, but nothing more. Next morning, I noticed the fridge was on a little timer. It hummed for 5 minutes, then went silent for an hour. At first I thought it was broken, but when it clicked back on, everything felt cold again. Small stuff, but odd. Mark shrugged it off. We spent the day on the nearby trail. Nothing special: Rusty Creek, yellow leaves, no one else around. On our second night, the power flickered off around 8. The cabin went dark except for the stove's pilot light. I heard something shift in the loft above the bedroom, just a soft scrape. I froze, listening. Nothing happened. After a minute I shrugged and grabbed my book by flashlight. Mark said he'd fix the breaker in the morning. Around midnight I woke to a thump in the living room. I'd left my phone there on the coffee table. I nudged Mark and whispered. He said probably the couch settling. But the thumps kept coming once every 60 seconds, soft but measured, like someone was tapping their fingers on wood. I lay still until it stopped, then rolled over and pretended to sleep. In the morning I discovered the cupboard under the sink door was ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open. Inside, I saw a small enamel tray with a pad of paper and 2 pens. I flipped through the pages. Grocery lists, doodles, phone numbers probably left by past renters. I tucked it back and closed the door tight. That afternoon we lit the stove again and I cooked soup. I poked at the grate and found something underneath, a metal key taped to the underside. Not the cabin key, it was longer, like an old door key. I asked Mark if the cleaner had it. He said no. I pocketed the key. After dinner, I told Mark I wanted to check the loft. We hadn't been up there. The ladder was folded near the dresser. I propped it, climbed up. The loft floor was bare, dusty, no footprints. There was a little hatch in the ceiling. I lifted it a few inches, pitch black. No ladder above that, so I dropped it back and climbed down. We went to bed, but I lay awake thinking about the key in the hatch. I nudged Mark, said, "What do you think the key opens?" He said, "Probably the old root cellar." I didn't buy it, but I didn't press it. Morning of day 3, after coffee, I said I wanted to explore the cellar idea. Mark agreed to go with me. We followed the key's teeth through the kitchen floorboards into the dirt crawl space. I knelt by the foundation and fit the key into a rusted iron lock that had been hidden under ivy. It turned. A square hatch in the ground swung open to a pitch-black hole 6 feet deep. We peered down. No stairs, just damp earth walls. I closed it fast. We left the key on the table, feeling like idiots for poking around. That evening I decided to clean out the dresser drawer in the bedroom, just mindless busy work. I pulled the top drawer, dumped socks on the bed. Underneath was a folded piece of cardstock. It was a list, handwritten, names and dates. Kelly S., June 12, 2019. Tom P., July 3, 2020. Maria L., August 15, 2021, crossed out. Jenna H., September 28, 2022, crossed out. October 10, 2023. The last line was blank except for the date. My heart thumped so loud it echoed in my ears. Jenna H. was me. My last name starts with H, and I'd arrived on the 28th. I stared at it, then at the dates. Each previous name paired with the same mid-October weekend, crossed out when their date came. I felt Mark's hand on my shoulder. He asked what was wrong. I showed him the list. He paled. We looked around. The dresser had never been moved. No reason anything else would be under there. The names, they were people who'd stayed here, same cabin, same weekend, every year for 5 years. And they were crossed out. Like they didn't exist anymore. I told Mark we had to leave. He agreed, but I also wanted to call someone. I ran to the phone, but it was dead. No dial tone, just silence. I checked the jack, nothing. We'd lost the one line. We packed in shaky silence. I kept eyeing the dresser. I stuffed the list into my bag and grabbed my phone, pray for signal. Nothing. We headed for the door, but I stopped at the hatch in the floorboards. It sat slightly ajar, like it had been opened again. I slammed it down and locked it. My hand shook so hard I broke the lock on the crawlspace latch. By the time we walked to the truck, the sky had turned purple. I jumped in, hit the starter. The engine cranked but didn't catch. I tried twice. Nothing. Mark tried. Nothing. My breath came fast. We were stranded. I looked at the cabin, no lights, no movement. I glanced at my bag, the list fell out, fluttered at my feet. I kicked it away and glanced back at the doorway. I thought I saw a shape in the window, like someone standing behind the curtain, watching us struggle. I slammed my door and ran around to the passenger side. I grabbed the list and my pack, ran across the clearing and into the woods without looking back. Branches whipped my arms, my lungs burned. I followed the faint path we'd come in on, stumbling toward the highway we knew was 5 miles out. I called 911 when I hit cell service, already breathing hard. I told them I was lost and something wasn't right at the cabin. They sent a dispatcher to pick us up. I stayed near pavement, kept looking over my shoulder. I never saw anyone following. The next morning, I called the rental agency. They said the cabin was built last year and had exactly 2 rentals, ours and one last summer. No list, no prior renters. They offered refunds and checked the landline. They found it was never connected. My dates were the first booking. I never went back. I scrubbed my clothes, threw out my backpack. I changed the locks at home, checked the doors, triple-checked the windows. And sometimes, when I open a drawer, I look to make sure nothing odd is written on a slip of paper I can't explain. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun slipped behind the pines, and for a second the cabin looked perfect, dark wood, stone chimney, a little smoke curling from the flue. Me and Jenna unloaded our bags. The place was empty, quiet, and smelled like wood polish and pine needles. I unlocked the door, flicked on the overhead light, and we stepped inside. At first glance, everything felt normal. But then I noticed the couch was maybe 6 inches farther from the wall than it should have been. The coffee table wasn't centered under the overhead lamp, it sat a little to the left. Lamps on end tables were off-center by an inch or two. Jenna pointed at the bookshelf. Every row of books was skewed slightly to the right. Weird, but none of it screamed danger, right? I told her I'd straighten it later. She laughed and unpacked. We spent the first night doing nothing special, fried up sausages in the little kitchen, spread out on the couch, and watched downloaded episodes of some sitcom on my laptop. The cabin creaked around us, wind rattled the windows, and we laughed every time we heard a popsicle stick crackling in the wood stove. I locked the door at 10, wedged a chair under the knob, and we both fell asleep on the couch. Next morning, I woke before Jenna. I yawned, stretched, and cracked my eyes on the window. Light was streaming in, but something felt off. I sat up, dropped my feet on the floor, and noticed the coffee table was aligned under the lamp now. Exactly centered. I rubbed my eyes. The couch had been pushed flush against the wall. The lamp on the end table was perfectly placed. Even the bookshelf rows matched from left to right, no longer skewed. I went to the kitchen. The toaster, and I swear I'd left it at the far right of the counter, was now dead center. The sugar jar had moved an inch closer to the wall. I felt my throat close up. Jenna stirred on the couch, blinking at me. "Why are you giving me that look?" she asked. I tried to laugh it off. "Nothing," I said, but my voice shook. I shrugged and made coffee. Over breakfast, I pointed out a few things. She got quiet. Then she moved her cup farther from the edge. She'd been drinking from it all morning without thinking. I started checking every corner. It was like overnight someone had come in here and rearranged absolutely everything, but left no fingerprints, no footprints, no sign of entry. The lock on the door was still bolted from the inside, and the window latches were all snapped shut. We agreed it must have been us in a half-sleep, nudging stuff around without noticing. I unbolted the chair and pushed it under the desk. Jenna realigned the bookshelf. It took 20 minutes. We told ourselves it was fine. That afternoon, we went for a hike. The woods nearby felt friendly by comparison. Mossy logs, chipmunks darting in the underbrush, sun filtering down in gold ribbons. Back at the cabin, we sorted firewood and grilled burgers outside. No electricity, just lanterns. We chatted about work, the city, nothing spooky. We went to bed earlier that night, tired. I bolted the door properly and slid chairs up against it. Jenna curled up under a blanket. I put my shoes by the couch. I watched her sleep for a minute, quiet as a kid. Then I closed my eyes. I woke just before 3 to the softest thump. Like a pillow dropped. My heart sped up. I lay still, listening. Nothing. 5 minutes later, another thump, then a soft scrape, like wooden furniture sliding. My eyes shot open. I caught a flicker of lantern light coming from the living room. I nudged Jenna. "Did you hear that?" She mumbled. I whispered, "Something's moving." She shook her head. I unbolted the door with shaking hands and crept toward the couch. The lamp on the side table was tilted again, just a hair, but it was enough. I flicked on my phone light and saw the coffee table had shifted 30 degrees, pointing at the hallway. The couch was a foot into the middle of the room. My hands went cold. I followed the corridor of flashlight toward the bedroom door. I thought I heard someone breathing softly, an instant of heavy breath, then nothing. I stood outside our room for minutes, every muscle clenched, too scared to check. Finally I thought, maybe it's a raccoon. Maybe noise carries weird. I slammed the bedroom door, wedged the chair under the knob again, and hid under the covers. I waited until dawn, listening to my own pulse. When morning came, I peeked out. Everything was back where we dragged it last night, couch flush to the wall, coffee table under the lamp, bookshelf skewed again. It was as if whoever came and arranged it on their own terms and then slipped back out before we woke. Jenna and I just stared at each other, arms wrapped in blankets. We left the cabin that day for lunch in town. Over burgers, Jenna said we should call the rental agency. I told her we should wait a day, maybe it would stop. We went back, checked windows and doors for prime marks. Nothing. The locks worked fine. Wind hadn't blown in. No footprints on the porch. My skin crawled thinking about someone crawling through the darkness, rearranging chairs. That night we decided to sleep in shifts. I took the first watch. I sat in the rocker by the window, holding a flashlight, and watched the tree line. Every so often I heard the floor creak. Maybe I was imagining things. I drank lukewarm coffee and waited. 2 a.m., a scraping noise from the other room. I froze, listening. The sound came again, metal on wood like a lamp base being nudged. I flicked my flashlight on and limped into the living room. The floor was clear. The lamp on the end table lay on its side. I straightened it up and waited. No footsteps, no breathing. Nothing but my ragged breath in the silent cabin. I kept watch until 6. Jenna woke up and took over. I collapsed on the couch, exhausted. She sat by the window, eyes wide, gripping the flashlight, shaking. That afternoon, over stale granola bars, we agreed to cut our trip short. I packed while she cleaned. Every time I put an item in my bag, I checked it wasn't nudged 3 inches to the left. The dresser drawer was open from the afternoon before. I slammed it shut and locked it. My bag straps felt tight across my shoulders. We stood in the doorway one last time. The cabin looked normal again, as if nothing had happened. For a moment, I almost believed it. Then I saw the coffee table centered under the lamp. But I'd left it 6 inches to the left of that. I swallowed hard. We drove away without speaking, the radio off, windows cracked just enough for the wind. I kept checking the rearview mirror for headlights, for someone standing on that porch. Nothing. Back home, I replaced our locks. I bought a security camera for our apartment. I told my friends it was just the wind or a fluke. But sometimes at night I lie in bed and imagine someone sneaking in, arranging my shoes, nudging the lamps, waiting for me to wake up and wonder who's been in my life. The cabin was just walls and wood, but when someone knows exactly where each piece of your world sits, it feels like they know you. And they'll always find a way back in. I booked the cabin online because it was cheap and quiet. It sat deep in the woods, 7 miles down a gravel road that cut through pine and birch. No cell service past the main road, the listing said. That was the draw me and Claire needed to get away from work and noise. We drove in Friday afternoon, light slanting gold through the trees. The cabin looked exactly like the pictures. Dark stained logs, a wraparound porch, stacks of firewood cut neat beside the door. The lockbox code worked. Inside smelled like damp cedar and old blankets. We spent the first evening building a fire, drinking canned beer, playing cards by lantern light. At 10, I bolted the deadbolt, slid the wooden bar across the door, and we crashed in the bedroom. The bed creaked under us. The walls were thin enough to hear the fire crackle. Claire snored in minutes. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind tug at the roof. Nothing else. Next morning, I found the little kitchen timer unattended on the counter. I'd set it for eggs, but it was reset to 0. I asked Claire if she'd used it. She shook her head. I shrugged and set it for coffee. Over breakfast, I noticed the porch swing had moved 2 feet closer to the door. I remembered the boards on that side were uneven, so I thought maybe the swing wrapped around on its chains in the breeze. I straightened it anyway. We hiked the loop trail down by the creek. No one else around, just mossy logs and wet rocks. Back at the cabin, every window latch was closed even though we left one cracked. I thought the latch might have clicked shut when I closed the window. I didn't say anything. We cooked dinner and went to bed at 9. At exactly 1:12 a.m. I woke to soft knocking. I rolled over and peeked at the clock on the nightstand. 3 slow knocks on the front door. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. I jerked awake and nudged Claire. She blinked at me, groggy. I whispered, "Someone's at the door." She mumbled, "Probably a raccoon." I shook my head and got out of bed, lantern in my hand. Downstairs was quiet except for the knuckles tapping the wood. I slipped off my slippers and crept to the door. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. I rattled the deadbolt. It stayed locked. I whispered, "Go back to sleep," slipped back upstairs, and wedged the chair under the doorknob. The knocks stopped. I lay awake until dawn, eyes squeezed shut. Morning light felt strange. I checked the latch on the window I'd closed ajar again. I didn't mention it to Claire. At breakfast, my spoon clinked against the bowl so loud I jumped. Claire watched me a moment and said nothing. I tried to laugh it off. Night 2, same drill. At 1:12, 3 knocks. I sat up. Claire was out cold. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my phone for light, and crept down. The knocks came from the front door again. I didn't hear them at the back, steady, deliberate. I pressed my ear against the door. Wind, the wood groaning, and that tapping. I tried the deadbolt. The door didn't budge. I peeked through the window by the lock. No flashlight, no shape. I jiggled the bolt just to hear it click. The knocks stopped. I went back to bed and pulled the covers up over my head. Next morning, I noticed the firewood stack was missing 2 logs. I remembered exactly where we left the pile by the porch. We hadn't touched it. I asked Claire if she'd moved logs to feed the stove. She said no. I shrugged and leaned a couple logs back, stomping mud off my boots to keep the floor clean. That day, I paced the living room, checking the locks and windows. I tried to distract myself with cleaning dishes, sweeping floorboards, adjusting pictures on the walls. Nothing felt right. I kept glancing at the door, hearing phantom knocks. I knew it was real. My gut pinched every time I thought of it. That night, I didn't lock the deadbolt. I wanted to see if someone would try the knob. At 1:12 a.m. the 3 knocks came again. I held my breath. The knob rattled once light, like a quick twist, but the door stayed. I flicked on the lantern. Nothing outside. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the wind. Then I heard soft footsteps on the porch boards, walking in rhythm with my pulse. Creak, creak, creak. It stopped. I stayed by the door for 5 minutes, shaking. I didn't check bolts or use the chair. I just crept back to bed and hugged Claire until the sky turned gray. Morning brought a new terror. The bedroom window was wide open, and the latch on the inside was snapped. That window faced the woods, 20 feet off the ground. I don't know how anyone could have reached it without a ladder. I woke Claire. She sat up, pale, and we stared at each other. I said we were leaving. She asked about our phones. Mine had no bars. Hers showed 1 bar. She dialed her sister, voice trembling. No answer. We kept trying. No one. We packed frantically, stuffing clothes into bags, piling into the truck. I tested the doorknob, it clicked freely. I turned the key in the lockbox twice to jam the bolt. We sat inside for another hour until the sun was high. I called 911 on Claire's phone. They asked where we were. GPS showed us on map they recognized a state forest, legal to camp and rent. They dispatched a ranger to check the cabin. We drove away slowly, eyes on the rearview mirror. Back on paved road, I saw a sheriff's deputy pull onto the dirt driveway behind us. We pulled over and waited while he drove up to the cabin. I watched him talking to his radio, walk the porch, flash his light through windows. He didn't find anyone. He called for backup, talked to dispatch. He flagged us down 20 minutes later, told us it was clear, but they found boot prints in damp soil, circling the cabin, then heading back into the woods. No footprints on the porch. No prints inside. No sign of damage. He asked if we wanted to press charges. I shook my head. He said, "Keep your phones on and call if you see anything else." I nodded and we drove off, both of us silent. That night, we stayed at a motel in town. I lay awake listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the car alarms outside. Every minute past 1:12, I thought I heard a knock on the motel door, felt a presence in the room. I didn't sleep until morning. Now, I still check the locks on my front door at night. I keep my phone charged. When I hear a tap on wood, a branch against my window, a neighbor's dog scratching at the door, I look through the peephole. Because out there, someone was patient enough to knock at the same time for 3 nights, trying to see if the door was unlocked, listening for the bolt to turn. I can't stop thinking that if I'd stayed one more minute downstairs, I would have heard them come inside. But I didn't, and I realized how quickly someone can be closer than you think, just waiting for the right moment. I drove up the dirt road around 5, unloaded my stuff, and walked down to the dock. The lake was smooth, the kind of quiet you only get when no one else is around. My rental cabin was 10 yards from the water, hidden in cedars. I'd planned a week alone to write and fish, get away from my phone. I noticed right away there was no cell service past to turn off exactly what I wanted. That first night, I made chili on the stove, ate by the window, watching the lake turning black. I turned off all the lights around 10 and went to bed. In the pitch dark, I heard water slapping against the dock, slow, steady. I assumed it was wind or a fish. I closed my eyes and slept. Next morning over coffee, I sat on the porch and looked across the water. On the far shore, about a quarter-mile away, there was a thin slash of light. It was about 5 feet off the ground, steady, like a lantern set on a stump. I blinked, waited. It stayed. I shrugged. Maybe someone camped there. The area was public land. That day, I hiked east of the lake. I passed no campsites, no people. Only deer tracks and a few bird calls. I came back at sunset and the light was still there, glowing as dusk sank in. I jotted it down in my notebook. Campfire? Lantern? Someone watching. I didn't worry. That night, I heard a twig snap outside the cabin at 11:17 exactly. I woke, sat up, waited. Nothing else. The light across the lake was gone. I checked the porch, no footprints in the dirt. I went back to bed. On night 2, I saw the slash of light again, coming on at precisely 9:05. I watched from my rocking chair, lantern at my elbow. It stayed fixed in one spot, even as the trees lost all detail. I half expected to move, but it didn't. After half an hour, it winked out. I wondered if a ranger or a poacher was trespassing. That morning I found a muddy footprint on the front step. Too big for my shoes. It looked fresh. I compared it to my boot, no match. I cleaned it with a stick and rinsed the step. I tried not to think about it, but I kept glancing at the woods behind the cabin. No paths, just underbrush. That afternoon I called the rental owner from town. He said no one was allowed on the Far Shore State Wildlife Preserve. Rangers patrol it, no overnight camping. I told him about the light. He said it must have been someone stalking deer at dusk. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I sat up reading my notes, lantern off, when I heard a slow scrape at the window behind me. I froze. A moment later, there was a soft thud on the roof, like someone dropping a small log. My heart pounded. I flicked on the light and stared at the window. Nothing. I went to the front door locked and peered out. No one. I checked the back, no prints. I slammed the door and didn't sleep till dawn. On day 4, I stayed inside as clouds gathered. I saw the light across the lake again at 8:47, even through the haze. I grabbed binoculars, couldn't make out a figure, just a dim glow. I thought about telling the ranger station, but I didn't want to lose my solitude. Still, I expected to see something in daylight. I hiked down the eastern trail to the lake's edge, but the far bank was steep and scrubby. I didn't see any fire scars or lantern posts. That evening, thunder rolled in. I sat by the stove watching lightning flicker behind clouds. At 9:05, the lantern glow cut through the storm's gloom, bright and clear. My skin crawled. It stayed for 5 minutes, then faded. I stared out the wet window until rain tapped glass. I didn't sleep again. On the 5th night, it rained hard. Water dripped from the eaves in steady streams. I sat in the loft, thinking I'd read until I fell asleep. At 1:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of something heavy sliding against the cabin siding on the far side. I lay frozen, strained to hear anything beyond rain. After a minute, the sliding stopped. I turned over, pulled a blanket up under my chin, and tried to calm my pulse. Rain drowned out all else. I dozed. Morning, the deck was soaked, puddles on each board. No tracks. My boots were inches from the door where I'd left them, still wet. I grabbed coffee and sat outside, staring at the far shore. No light. No movement. That evening I decided I'd leave first thing in the morning. I packed most of my bag and cleaned the cabin. At 8, I flicked off all lights, closed the curtains, and tried to trick my eyes. I checked my watch, 9:04. I sat on the couch in silence. At exactly 9:05 p.m., the slash of light came on. But it was 100 yards from me, not across the lake. I bolted up and stumbled toward the back door. Through the window I saw it, the same lantern glow, bobbing between trees 30 feet from the cabin. I held my breath. It moved closer, toward the side wall. I yanked the door open. Rain spattered the porch. No one there. I shone my phone light into the trees. Nothing but wet trunks and undergrowth. My chest tightened. I wanted to run, but rain made the board slick. I backed inside and slammed the door, locking it twice. I dialed 911 but got only a click. I hit redial, another click. My phone had one bar, but calls wouldn't connect. I texted the owner, someone at my window, need help. No reply. I dragged a chair in front of the back door, then braced the couch under the doorknob. I grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from the stove and sat on the couch, shaking, waiting. My phone buzzed, a single message from unknown. Good night. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, then at the door. Rain pounded. I hugged the skillet tight. Minutes later, I heard soft footsteps on the porch, barefoot, light, stepping slowly toward the back door. My pulse raced so loud I thought whoever was out there could hear it. The steps paused. Then there was a quiet knock at the kitchen window, gentle tap, tap, tap. I swung my light over. A face filled the glass, a dark shape, chin pressed to the windowsill, eyes reflecting my beam. I screamed, dropped the skillet. The thing at the window ducked away. Splintered boards snapped outside, like someone breaking brush to circle the cabin. I leapt to my feet and sprinted up the stairs, crashing through the loft, tripping over my bag. I burst into the bedroom, yanked open the window, and jumped onto the ground below. I tumbled in the wet grass and scrambled for my bag. My boots were by the back door. I pulled them on and sprinted across the clearing toward my truck, heart in my throat. I didn't look back. I skidded on gravel, tore open the door, and slammed it shut behind me. I fumbled the keys and turned the ignition. Tires spun, engine caught, and I peeled out, headlights spraying water across the road. I didn't stop until I saw a lit gas station on Highway 35. I flagged down a highway patrol car and told them everything. The light across the lake, the one at my cabin, the message, the face at the window. They radioed for backup and escorted me back at first light. When we got to the cabin, there were no footprints in the mud, only my boot prints leading in from the truck. No lantern, no campsite, no sign of anyone. The patrolman said it might have been someone cutting between trees, but deep woods leave no tracks. I left that day. I went back twice with more officers, with rangers, with search dogs. They found nothing. The state patroller told me sometimes people vanish into those forests, but no one shows up. I haven't gone near that lake since. Sometimes at night I wake and see a dot of light flickering in my mind, like someone waiting in the dark, just beyond sight. I didn't think much of it at first. Me and Paige pulled up to the cabin just after 5, late August sun slanting between the pines. It looked cozy in the photos, log walls, green roof, little porch swing. The path in was rough, gravel turning to dirt, and it would have been easy to miss if you blinked. We drove up, unloaded our bags, and I unlocked the door with the code the owner texted. Inside smelled like mothballs and damp carpet. Nothing screamed someone lives here. We set our stuff down, flicked on the lamps, and opened windows for a breeze. I made sandwiches, Paige unpacked clothes. The living room couch was 3 inches farther from the wall than I expected. Not a big deal, thought maybe the cleaners pushed it. Later, I noticed the toaster was sitting on the left side of the counter instead of the right. Paige asked if I'd moved it. I said no. We shrugged it off. That night we ate dinner by lantern light, steaks and corn cooked on the little gas stove, and laughed over a bottle of wine. We locked the door at 9, slid the bolt. I cocked my head at a floorboard creaking above us, but said nothing. In bed, the house was quiet except for the fan in the hall and the breeze rattling window screens. I slept hard. Next morning, I stumbled into the kitchen, blinking. The sugar bowl was on the far corner of the table instead of by the coffee maker. Paige wasn't up yet. I fixed coffee and nudged the bowl back. I told myself I'd moved it in my sleep. I didn't ask Paige because I didn't want her to think I was losing it. We spent the day hiking a nearby trail. No one else on the path. At midday, I counted the blade marks on my pocket knife, 17 nicks, not 16. I checked the pile of logs by the stove later and saw my knife was missing. I asked Paige if she saw it. She shook her head. After lunch, I found it tucked into the firewood stack, handle sticking out like someone wanted me to see it. Goosebumps. I told myself it was me, stashing it and forgetting, but I remembered clearly tossing it on the counter. That night, I slept on the couch so I could keep an ear on the floor above. I fell asleep around 11. At 2, I woke to the sofa shifting beneath me, like someone pressed down on it from behind. I froze, held my breath. Nothing else. I sat up. The couch hadn't moved. I chalked it up to a bad dream and lay back down. The next time I opened my eyes, dawn was breaking. Over cereal, I told Paige I wanted to check the attic. I'd noticed that little square door in the ceiling when I unloaded my bag. She looked at me funny but agreed. We pulled a chair under the hatch in the living room, lifted it, and climbed in. The attic crawl space was maybe 3 feet tall and 10 feet long, insulated walls and floor. Nothing but dust and an old single bulb dangling from a wire. I crawled toward the far end, where I saw a flattened spot in the insulation. There was a small cot frame, rusted, with a filthy blanket on it. Next to it, a dusty duffel bag, half open, empty cans of beans, and a stack of paperback thrillers. On the wall, someone had taped Polaroid photos, shots of the cabin windows, the porch swing, an empty beer bottle on the table. My face was in one, asleep on the couch. My heart pounded. I whispered Paige's name, and she stayed frozen at the hatch. I flicked the bulb switch. A weak glow showed more stuff: a rolled yoga mat, a small camping stove, stacks of notebooks with scrawled dates. The last entries were 2 days ago. They turned the knob just enough to hear the bolt, then a line scratched out. I slammed the hatch and dropped to the floor. Paige was white as a sheet. We ran downstairs and bolted the door. I grabbed my phone, no service, and dialed 911 from the landline on the kitchen wall. No dial tone. I tried again. Click. I shoved my hand through the boards under the sink and ripped out the cable. Nothing. Electricity still worked, so the phone jack was fake. I found the old screwdriver by the fuse box and popped the circuit outside. Lights died, windows plunged into gray dusk. I covered my eyes and listened. From above, soft creaking, shifting insulation like someone walking on boards. Footfalls very slow, measured. I whispered, "He's up there." Paige grabbed my arm. I told her we had to get out. I opened the front door, locked, blocked by chairs and a ladder. All our limbs cramped from loading the car this morning. We shoved the chairs away, wrenched the bolt, and ran. Halfway down the drive, I looked back. The cabin windows glowed faintly orange, no lanterns in the attic crawl space. I sprinted to our car, jammed the key in the lock, doors clicked open. I hit the gas and tires spun on gravel. Paige was silent, head pressed to the window. We called the sheriff from the highway just as the cabin's 3 lights went dark. He told us to stay on the line, that deputies were en route. We parked at the nearest turnout, waited 20 minutes until headlights appeared behind us. We led them back, no one in sight. Doors locked, windows shut, no prime marks. No chairs from inside. No ladder. No footprints except ours in the dirt. They searched for hours, hampered by woods and night. The deputies found the cook pot lid I dropped, a boot print in the leaves behind the cabin, and that was it. No hidden room, no soft mat in the attic. They couldn't find the hatch. The next morning they told us the attic ceiling looked smooth, no signs of recent cut or fit. The landlord came by, apologized profusely, said he'd never heard of squatters there. He offered refunds, but I didn't care. We left the cabin for good at first light, sun slanting through trees that suddenly felt menacing. Back in town, I slept in a motel room with a chain lock and 2 deadbolts. My nightmares still stick to me, muffled breathing in the ceiling, the sweep of a flashlight beam across my face and sleeping bag. I checked my place for squatters the next week, crawl space under the porch, attic vents, everything. Nothing turned up. I sold my tools, turned off my phone ringer, and now I leave a floor lamp on when I'm home. Sometimes at night I hear a bump in my ceiling, a shift, and I wake thinking of that hatch, wondering if he slipped back in after I left, living quietly where no one thinks to look. And I keep checking the attic door. We got to the cabin around 5, dumped our packs in the living room, and I plugged my Fire Stick into the TV. The place was sweet, hardwood floors, big windows, gas stove, but zero cell signal. We joked about being off the grid, ghosts of Wi-Fi routers wandering the forest floor. I fired up the TV, scrolled through HDMI inputs, and landed on the Fire interface. Maria was in the corner, unpacking marshmallows and graham crackers. Jake was checking the deadbolt on the front door. Carly leaned against the kitchen counter, flipping through our paper map. The TV booted up and flickered to life, Fire Stick menu, all normal until I hit apps and saw a folder called Media. I froze. Who put videos on this? I asked. Nobody answered. We all stared at the TV. Under Media was one file, a date that was yesterday's date. We'd only arrived today. I clicked it. The screen went black for a beat, then grainy footage filled the screen. Darkness, at first. Then a dim orange glow. I recognized the corner of the living room, the couch, the big window facing the woods. Someone was holding a flashlight, walking slowly into frame. You could hear it clicking, like someone fumbling with the lens. Heart in my throat, I leaned forward. The flashlight bobbed around, tapping the arm of the couch, swinging over the coffee table. The camera followed the same path we'd taken when we arrived into the kitchen, past the stove, through that narrow hallway. It was our cabin, every scuff on the floor, the dent in the stove door. Carly gasped. "That's us," she said. "Last night. Before we got here." The flashlight beam caught on a mirror near the bedroom door. You saw someone crouch, but the beam was off-center, too low. Then the recorder's own shadow stretched up the wall, like someone leaning tall. It moved into the bedroom. In the next shot, you glimpsed a blanket on the bed shifting, like someone was under it, breathing. Jake shut the door to the kitchen. On screen, the beam tracked the bedroom door. You heard a soft scrape, someone nudging the wood. And then it cut out. Nothing else in the folder, just that one video. We sat in shocked silence. I pressed play again, my pulse racing. When it ended, the Fire Stick menu popped back up like nothing happened. I hit exit and the TV went blank. Carly said, "I thought we were alone." I told her I turned wireless off, pulled the HDMI out, nothing. The cabin had no other inputs. We locked ourselves in the living room, pushed our chairs against the door. Outside, the wind soughed through pines. The old floorboards creaked somewhere above us. No thunder, no birds. Just the hush of leaves. Earlier that evening, we all heard something upstairs. I remember Jake asking if I'd left my bag on the stair landing. I said no. Carly said she heard a footstep at the top, then quiet. We blamed creaky floorboards and old houses settling. Now I felt raw. I tapped my flashlight against the armrest, listening. Maria said maybe it was the last renters. The owner must check the place and film for damage. I said that made no sense. Why record after dark with a flashlight? And why leave it on the Fire Stick? She fell silent. We tried to laugh it off, but no one smiled. We turned the TV off and lit candles. I checked the front window. No movement, nothing but trees. The moon was half hidden behind clouds. That night, I slept on the couch with the remotes in my coat pocket. At 3 a.m. I woke to a soft tap, tap, tap on the living room window. I bolted upright. Carly whispered, "I'm scared." I shone my phone light at the glass. No one. I crept to the kitchen, grabbed a butcher knife, and stood by the door. I waited until dawn, too keyed up to move. Morning spilled in gray and cold. We found muddy footprints on the porch, big, gloppy, one set leading around to the back and stopping at the window. No prints on the porch boards themselves, just in the dirt. Carly took pictures. The prints didn't match any of our boots. I was shaking as I packed a bag. Jake said we should call the sheriff. I tried my phone, no bars. We piled into the truck and drove to the ranger station 2 miles down. The ranger looked at our pics, nodded, and said, "We've had break-ins here before. Cabin monitoring system standard, but nobody leaves old footage like that." He radioed to dispatch. We headed back with him in a patrol cart. Inside, he checked every inch, no sign of break-in, locks intact, windows latched. He pried off the TV panel, no hidden SD card or drive. The Fire Stick was factory reset, no apps beyond standard. The video must have been loaded from the owner's end before we showed up. We sat on the porch while he checked for tracks again. He found footprints leading into the woods, shallow but fresh. Then nothing. Rangers combed the pines for hours with dogs. Nothing turned up. I told him we were leaving. He said to keep watch on the property, call if we saw anything else. I nodded, my hands trembling so hard I could barely light the truck. Back home, I kept thinking about the crouched shape in the bedroom, the way the blanket moved. I keep replaying the video in my head, the slow pan of the flashlight, the sound of my own cabin creaking, but out of sync by one day. Now, when I set up a Fire Stick anywhere, I check the media folder first. If I ever see a file I didn't put there, I turn it off and walk away. Because someone was in our cabin, walking with a flashlight, filming us before we even got the chance. And I can't stop thinking about what they would have done if we stayed one more night. I showed up at the cabin just before sunset. Me and Claire had driven in for a quiet weekend, no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just trees and 2 walls and a sloped-in roof. The place was basic but clean. There was a wood stove, a sagging couch, and a little front porch with enough chairs to sit in silence. When we unloaded the car, I noticed something heavy behind the porch swing, a big cooler, like a camping one, green and dented. It had a padlock on it, brass, old, with flecks of rust. I knelt and jiggled it. Locked tight. No key. I opened my mouth to ask Claire if she put it there. She was inside fiddling with the stove. I knocked on the cooler. It sounded empty. I shrugged it off and went inside. We cooked pasta and drank canned beer. The cabin smelled of linoleum and pine. I asked about the cooler. Claire said she hadn't seen it, didn't know who would leave a locked cooler on a porch of a vacant cabin. We decided to call the owner in the morning. I locked up at 10, deadbolt, slide bar, both windows latched, and crawled into bed. The wood stove crackled for a while, then slumbered. I woke around 2 because the floor creaked behind me, like something heavy being dragged. I lay still. The moon through the curtains looked pale and empty. I drifted back to sleep. Next morning I threw on my jeans and went outside. The cooler was gone. No dent in the porch boards, no oil stain where it sat. I checked around the yard, nothing but a broken branch by the woodpile. The front door stood wide open. My heart jumped and I ran back inside, glancing at windows. Nothing else moved. Everything we'd unpacked was in place. My boots where I left them. Claire came to the door, rubbed her eyes, said she woke up cold. We both stared at the empty space where the cooler had been. I locked the door again, bolted it properly, and sealed the windows with extra wedges we found under the bed. Claire called the owner. No answer. We left a voicemail. Someone came in last night. We woke up, door open, cooler gone. Then we headed to town for coffee and cell bars. Back at the cabin, we scoured the porch and yard. I found footprints in soft dirt 30 feet away, 5 prints, barefoot, size 10 or 11, leading toward the woods. They stopped at a tree line. No prints back. I showed Claire. She examined each one. No sock fibers, no debris stuck. Whoever it was, they didn't come back. We tried to pretend it was nothing. We set up a camp chair in the living room, sat facing the door, and watched movies on Claire's downloaded tablet until twilight. The windows rattled once or twice from wind, but no sounds of someone returning. I kept thinking I saw shapes out of the corner of my eye, branches crossing the porch light, a flicker on the window pane, but when I looked, nothing. After our second night, Claire refused to sleep in the bedroom. She slept on the couch. I took the bed. I bolted the bedroom door from the inside. Around 1:17 a.m., I woke to a soft thump like a log dropping in the wood stove. I listened. Then came another thump, like someone poking the wood pile outside. I sat up, heart pounding. I kept still until dawn. That morning, I found one of the window wedges cracked in two. It hadn't been damaged before. I tapped it with a stick, plastic splintered, no nails. I showed Claire. She pressed her fingers to the crack, frowned. We realized someone had used force on the window frame. The latch was still clipped, but the wedge was snapped. Whoever left the cooler might have been here, trying doors and windows. We decided to leave at first light. But we still had one night, and it was too far to drive out in the dark. So we packed most of our stuff in the car, set it all ready. That evening, we ate granola bars and sipped coffee by the dying fire. The door was locked, the windows latched, wedge in place. We sat in the living room with a flashlight and a kitchen knife each. At 11:03 p.m., we heard it again, scrape on the porch. Not loud, but deliberate. A slow shift of wood against wood, like someone sliding a chair. I held my breath. Claire's hand found mine. We listened. Nothing else. We didn't move. After maybe 3 minutes, the scrape stopped. Then a soft knock, 1, pause, 2. On the door. I pressed my back against the couch, knife in hand. Claire's grip tightened. We heard someone whisper through the wood, so soft I couldn't make out words. My chest tightened. I looked at Claire. Her eyes were huge. She shook her head, mouthing "Don't." I closed my eyes and counted to 60. Then silence. No footsteps. No wood creak. Nothing. We never slept that night. We sat with our backs to the door, lights off, only moonlight making shadows on the walls. I checked my watch every 30 minutes. At 5:40, first dawn light slanted through gaps in the curtains. I moved first, rose, lit a candle, then 2 more. Claire followed, still pale. We ran to the car, threw our things inside, and drove off without locking up. I stared in the rearview mirror at the empty porch and dirt path leading into the woods. I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the tree line, a dark shape, tall, maybe wearing a hat. I slammed my foot on the gas. Headlights lit the gravel road, and I didn't look back again. Later, I read in a small-town forum that someone had stolen a cooler from a hunter's stand on the same road last month. They figured the thief ditched it at the cabin, then came back to retrieve it when no one was inside. But that didn't explain the padlock or the broken wedge or the knocks at the door. I never went back. Now, sometimes I hear a bump outside my own front door at night. Cat, raccoon, who knows, and I check the locks 3 times before I turn off the light. The night someone left that cooler, they tested every entrance, slipped inside darkness more than once, and knew we'd wait to find our door open. And they proved how easy it is to feel safe until you realize you're not. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped behind the pines. Me and Sarah had driven 4 hours for this weekend away, no cell service, no work, just a tiny rented cabin by a frozen-over lake. I unloaded our bags and saw something nailed to a tree about 10 feet from the porch, a mud-caked nylon dog collar, smeared dark red like old rust. It was screwed into the bark with a big framing nail, tag dangling silent against the trunk. I blinked. Sarah put down her bag and came over. She frowned, lifted the collar by one end of the nail. The metal tag was too rusty to read. I told her must have been left by hunters or some jerk passing through. She wrinkled her nose, said, "Let's just throw it in the woods." I tugged the nail with the claw of my hammer and dropped the collar in the brush. We didn't talk much the rest of the walk inside. The cabin smelled like damp cedar and old blankets. No electricity, just lanterns and a wood stove. Sarah stoked the fire while I unpacked. I kept glancing at the windows, wondering if someone watched us from the trees. She said I was being paranoid. I wiped sweat off my forehead and said she was right. That night, we ate canned chili and beer by lantern light. Outside, the wind rattled the porch boards like soft hail. I heard what I thought was a dog barking, just once, distant, half muffled by the trees. Sarah said it was nothing. I agreed, but when I peed outside later, I swore I saw a flashlight flick at the far edge of the lake. I stared, but it was gone. We locked the door, deadbolt, slide bar, both windows latched, and went to bed. The mattress creaked under us. I tried to sleep, but every breeze sounded like someone running a hand down the cabin's side, testing each board. I rolled over and listened until sleep took me. We woke to cold. I threw sticks in the stove. Sarah made coffee. The cabin filled with steam and pine smoke. I told her about the bark-deep nail. She said she'd found another nail in the woodpile but hadn't thought about it. I said whatever did it was probably careless. We ate oatmeal and planned a hike. On the trail, I kept checking behind us. At lunch, Sarah said I was jumpy, that I needed to relax. I agreed, but the forest was too quiet, no birds, no squirrels, nothing but our boots on pine needles. We circled back to the cabin by mid-afternoon. The front door had been left cracked, even though I remembered locking it tight. We didn't find footprints on the porch, just a crushed beer can we'd left there last night. I tossed it in the trash bag with shaking fingers. That afternoon, we split wood and filled water jugs. I noticed my new pocket knife was missing. I patted my pockets. Sarah said to check the woodpile. I unrolled logs, no knife. I swore I left it in my jacket on the chair. I climbed onto the roof to clear leaves out of the gutters and felt eyes on me, like something moving between the trees below. I scanned the woods. Nothing. I climbed down fast. That night, I slept on the couch while Sarah took the bed. I left the front light burning. Around midnight, I woke to scratching at the door, gentle but deliberate, like someone testing the latch. I grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove and tiptoed to the door. I peered through the peephole. The night was dark, edges of the porch lit by fading bulb light. No one. The latch was still locked, exactly where I left it. I went back to the couch and held the skillet until morning. At dawn, I found mud-caked footprints on the floorboards, barefoot, large, only 2 prints just inside the door. The mats we put down were on the porch, not inside. Sarah saw them and cried out. I rubbed her back and called our rental owner. No answer. I left a voicemail saying we felt unsafe. I said we'd leave later that day. We made coffee, trying to seem normal, but every floorboard groan sent us both glancing around. And then Sarah noticed something on the porch, another dog collar lying on the mat. This one was black nylon, tag shiny, clean. I picked it up and read the engraving, Sarah. Her eyes went wide. I dropped the collar. Tag skittered across the wood. We stared at it. Sarah picked it up again, hand shaking. The buckle was unclipped, like someone put it there and walked away. No blood this time, but the leather smelled faintly metallic. My mouth went dry. I felt my heart in my throat. The wind outside stopped. In the bushes by the stairs, I spotted camel pants draped over a branch, grass-stained, missing a boot. I motioned Sarah to stay put. I crept to the door and peered out. Nothing beyond the trees. I slammed the door and locked it triple. Sarah hugged the tag. I grabbed my phone, still no bars, but I remembered the landline under the kitchen sink. I fished it out and dialed 911. I got a dispatcher who asked where we were. I gave the crossroads we passed, explained our situation. She said deputies were 10 minutes away. We slid a chair under the knob and shoved the couch against the door. Sarah sat on the floor, back to the wall, hugging the Sarah collar. I stood guard by the window, kitchen knife in hand, watching the front yard. Everything was still, like the world outside paused. The minutes dragged. Then, just as I was about to call dispatch again, we heard a snap on the porch roof like a branch cracking under weight. I shone my phone light at the ceiling. Nothing but planks. Then the porch floor creaked under boot tread. Someone was on the steps, slow, testing each board. I held my breath. A soft tap at the door, knuckles hitting wood. 1, 2, 3. Pause. It didn't continue. I leaned close to the door, pressed my ear against it. I heard breathing deep, deliberate. My fists clenched on the knife. Then everything stopped. No wind, no birds. Just our ragged breathing inside. The porch light flickered. I saw a shadow by the glass peep tall, thin. I grabbed Sarah and whispered, "They're here." She looked at me, eyes full of panic. The door didn't open. Deputies rolled up just then, headlights spilling into the yard. The shadow darted away before we could see a face. The deputies kicked the door and no key in the lock and swept the porch. They found a single boot track leading into the woods and the camel pants slung over the branch. No other sign of anyone. I gave them the bloody collar nail, the bare collar with Sarah's name, the footprints. They said they'd search for hours but didn't hold out hope. We climbed into their cruiser and left everything behind. I looked back at the cabin, porch empty, chairs knocked askew, blood smear on the tree trunk where they nailed the first collar. I stayed with Sarah at a motel that night, lights on, doors locked. I checked her name on every collar in my head like a threat. I couldn't sleep until dawn. Deputies told us to change phone numbers, stay with friends. We did. Months later, I still jump at tree shakes, check windows 3 times before bed, and every time I see dog collars in stores, I think about those 2 letters spelled Sarah. And I remember how close we came to waking up and finding the next collar with my name on it.